is the possible explanation of the origin of environment was this professor of chemistry at the University of British Columbia named David Dolphin. And he first proposed this in 1985. He published a paper in the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And he's still a professor there. And if you write him an email, they'll send you one back and explain this whole thing. So that's exactly what we did because we were curious about it. He's actually still studying the molecules that are affected when this disease comes about.
All right, so the disease is porphyria. And you might wonder, what is porphyria? Well, it's a rare genetic disorder. And actually, the National Institutes of Health reports a prevalence of 1 in 500 to 1 in 50,000 individuals. So that's a big range, indicating that they don't really have many people studying this disease. But to tell you a little bit about it, it affects heme production. And heme is the chemical group that holds iron atoms in their proper position in hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is a dominant protein in red blood cells. And it actually makes your red blood cells red because of the iron in there. But when you have a defect in the making of this molecule, the heme molecule, you get porphyria. And porphyria comes from the Greek roots purple in pigment, and we'll tell you a little bit more about it.
So here's the molecule in question. And what happens is, inside your liver, you get an assembly line of enzymes that are making this molecule, because it's a very complex molecule. So this sits in the middle of the blood protein and holds an iron atom right there. And so if you have a disease, if you have porphyria, you have a complication at any one point along the assembly line. So if you think about it like a classic Henry Ford assembly line, in a disease state, you're going to get cars that don't have bumpers, or cars that don't have hoods.
Or engines.
Exactly. So some will work kind of, and some won't work very well. So you got to deal with all those non-working cars that are going off the work, so to say. So if you look, this is kind of a diagram of what's going on inside a cell it's affected with porphyria. Well, this is a normal cell actually, but there's 8 different forms of porphyria. So there's little subtleties to the symptoms of the different types of porphyria based on which stage in that assembly line, which enzyme is affected. And so this is just the diagram of the mitochondria. So those are the enzymes that are inside the mitochondria and the outside of the cell.
So light sensitivity is one of the traits we talked about. And it happens due to malformed porphyrin molecules that Chris talked about. But what happens is these molecules accumulate in tissue. And they're actually very toxic. But they also absorb light. And they affect people's skin and teeth because they absorb there. But when the person is exposed to light, like Nosferatu, the light can actually cause reactive oxygen species, a negative product that can really damage the skin of an individual with porphyria. So here's the heme molecule here, and here's the iron in the center. And if it's formed improperly, it can absorb light in any of these different rings and cause this negative effect. But this right here is a picture of on the left is a hand of an individual with porphyria. And you can see they have these caustic lesions. And these lesions are due to sun exposure and that negative effect with the sunlight hitting those built-up compounds. And an individual with porphyria would most likely avoid sunlight because they would try and avoid getting these caustic lesions. But on the right-hand side is 2 urine samples. On the left, there's a normal patient, or normal individual, and on the right, a porphyria patient. And you can kind of see, maybe not so well in this photograph, but it's kind of purplish. And maybe that's where the pigment purple Greek root came from. But if you take the urine and you put it in a test tube and then put it under a black light, you can see it glows purple, while a normal individual's urine doesn't do that. So this indicates that these malformed porphyrin rings are throughout the body. And actually, your body's trying to get rid of them. A porphyria patient's body's trying to get rid of it by urinating them out. And that's just one way to get rid of it, but they also form and collect in tissue, like I said before.
So, go back for a second. The one point I want to make here is kind of interesting that, so these molecules are light harvesting molecules, and they're just open rings. So if you saw that closed ring that we were talking about before, they're just open rings and flopping around like that, but open. And these molecules look exactly like the molecules in plants that are actually serving a good function. They're harvesting light and directing light towards the photocenters where photosynthesis happens. So in this case where you're having all these negative effects in the human animal, it's reverting back to a function that it used to do in plants. So the cyanobacteria have these malformed porphyrins that are doing something positive, but it's going on here.
Just an interesting. And I told you it builds up in tissues, but maybe I missed it, but it also builds up in teeth. And it's especially noticeable in teeth, but and gums, actually, because the gums actually have a huge amount of this porphyrin buildup. And the porphyrin is toxic, like I said before, and that can actually kill the gum tissue. And so what happens is you get this receding gum line, and it makes an image of